Let's go.
Hello and thank you for joining us for the 2021 debut of the EdjSports Head Coach Rankings. I'm your host, Katie George, alongside Ian O'Connor, EdjSports Senior Data Analyst. Throughout today's show, we're going to break down the 5 best and worst coaching decisions of the first half, as well as the top coaches at the halfway point for the largest NFL season ever. Now, Ian, the EdjSports rankings are a little bit different than traditional coaching rankings that we see from other platforms. I have an idea of what goes into the rankings, but can you just explain how you guys create these rankings as well as the analytics behind it?
That's right, Katie. Instead of subjectively ranking coaches based on things like motivation and scheme and like Dan Campbell said, biting kneecaps of their opponents, we look at it, their database with our win probability. So our rankings consist of 2 factors. One of them is performance to date, which is our edge power index, which we also call EPI. The other is fourth down decision making, also known as critical call index or CCI. So we put a strong emphasis on fourth downs, because fourth downs are where games are, or can be and often are, won and lost in the NFL. So we combine these two and we give equal weight to both the performance and the fourth down decision making for the coaches.
Okay, and there's also so much processing that goes into not only creating the rankings, but first generating team customizations each week to accurately judge if these coaches are making these decisions on a game-to-game basis. And we're also aware of the injuries that take place throughout the season, so that's imperative as we adjust based on injuries to represent an accurate, roster and who's available from each week. As many of you have seen over the course of the season, each week we call it the best and worst decisions. So why don't we start in a positive way with the best decisions we've seen up until this point?
Love to. And these aren't always the most fun. Sometimes the worst a little bit more fun because we get to kind of poke and jab at some of these coaches. But in both segments, you'll notice that the coaches who make the top of these lists, it's not necessarily indicative of the overall ranking. So the coaches that show up on this best decisions aren't necessarily going to be near the top.
Okay.
But starting at the number 1 best decision of the season so far belongs to Miami Dolphins head coach Brian Flores. So in week 6 against Jacksonville, they're over playing in London, which seems to be home for Jacksonville. Seems like they always win over there. But late in the fourth quarter, they're tied at 20, less than 2 minutes left. Miami still has 1 timeout left. Jacksonville still has all 3 of their timeouts, so it's 4th and 1. Miami's at their own 46, so this is a situation we'd see a lot of coaches punt, not wanting to fail and give up, easy or give up good field position for the opponent when all they need is a field goal to win. This was worth 21.6% in pre-snap win probability, so just a huge increase in win probability here. They ended up getting stopped short of the first down. Jacksonville won on a game-winning field goal, but this was the right decision to make in the situation. So props to Brian Flores, only in his second year, I believe. Right.
Fans probably don't feel that way.
Sitting on the couch, it's easier, and running the model. He's making the decision himself. But yeah, we commend his decision here at number 1. Number 2 is my head coach, go to the Green Bay Packers, Matt Lafleur, coming just 2 weeks ago in that Thursday night game in Arizona. He's got none of his top 3 receivers. They're up 24-21 against Arizona, undefeated at the time, Arizona Cardinals. Only about 3.5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. The Green Bay has no timeouts left. They kind of blew it a couple times late in the half, having to use timeouts. Arizona still has 2, but they've got 4th and goal at the 1. So this is a situation we rarely see coaches kick field goals anymore. We did see it this past week for Houston. I'm not really surprised that it was Houston, to be honest. But in this situation, he chose to go for it. It increased their win probability by 20.1%.
Wow.
And the pass ended up getting batted down. Green Bay ended up kind of surviving on a crazy play in their own end zone with Arizona, throwing an interception. A.J. Green not even looking for the ball, making a great play. But in this situation, you're up 3. If you kick a field goal, it's still a one-score game. A touchdown still beats you. A field goal doesn't tie it anymore, but you make your opponent be a little bit more aggressive in that situation because they don't have the field goal to fall back on to tie the game. So they're playing, they have to get a touchdown. And in this case, it came down to the wire. It almost came back to bite them, but regardless, it was the right call, and Green Bay was able to get the win there with the number 2 best decision. So number 3, this guy actually has 2 of our top 6. Brandon Staley, just this past week for the Los Angeles Chargers against Philadelphia. First-year head coach who has really impressed us this season. Not going to be surprised to see him if he ends up near the top of these coach rankings. But this one late in the fourth quarter, 2 minutes, 48 seconds left. They're tied at 24. They still do have 2 timeouts. Philly's got 3 timeouts, but they're facing 4th and 1 at the 39. So he's got a decision to make here. He can either kick a long field goal to try and take a 3-point lead, with still over 2.5 minutes left. I mentioned Philly's got all 3 of their timeouts. They still have the 2-minute warning to go down and only needing a field goal to tie, a touchdown to win. And he chose to go for it, increased their win probability by 19.5%. They end up converting this. They end up having another 4th and 1 at the Philly 28, I believe. Bypassed the field goal again. That one was the 6th best of the season so far. And the Chargers ended up running down the clock. Were able to win the game on a field goal.
Well, it's Philly. So.
Yep. Sorry, Matt, our producer here, big Philly fan, but it's been a rough year. But yeah, Staley actually did have a similar situation earlier this year too. So people always think analytics always say go for it. You all may remember the Kansas City game. He had a 4th and short, or 4th and medium, I think, going into Kansas City territory, tie game. Chose to go for it. We actually disagreed with that decision, so we don't always say to go for it. It is pretty common, but we disagreed. They ended up winning, so he's been very aggressive this season, which has been great to see.
Shows a lot of trust in his team as well.
Absolutely, especially the young quarterback Justin Herbert. He's had his struggles this year in their team, but yeah, putting trust in there and putting the ball in his hands to win the game.
All right, so who's at number 2 here?
Yeah, so Mike Vrabel is the next week 8. Again, just 2 weeks ago. A lot of these have come fairly recently. This was at Indianapolis. So this was 4th quarter, 3:22 left, tied at 24 in this game. Both teams have all 3 timeouts left, the Titans and Colts, facing 4th and 1 right at midfield. So this decision to go for it increased his win probability by 18.5%. They ended up converting here. They went on to score a touchdown. Unfortunately, they gave up a touchdown to force overtime, but they ended up winning the game. And this decision was a big part of it. Instead of punting the ball away and having Indianapolis drive down the field, take up all the time, because even if a really good punt, if it puts them at the 1, if they're able to get down the field, they're going to score a touchdown or field goal. If they do, there's going to be pretty much no time left for Tennessee.
And that was the 4th best decision.
Yes,
Excuse me, 4th best. Okay, now on to 5.
Yep, number 5, John Harbaugh. Who else? This one, kind of wish this one was a little bit higher than 5th. Still, top 5 is really good. But this was early in the season, week 2 against Kansas City, when everyone thought Kansas City was really good, and they've had their struggles this year as well, especially. But only 1:05 left in the 4th quarter. This was right after Kansas City running back Clyde Edwards-Helaire fumbled as they were going down for a game-winning field goal attempt. Ended up getting into a 4th and 1 situation at their own 43-yard line. So this one was it was a great call. I think a lot of people agreed with it. Some people probably disagreed with this more than in some of these other decisions. But 4th and 1 at your own 43, you don't get it. They're already in the long field goal range, but with Butker at kicker for Kansas City, it's not a stretch to think that he would make that close to 60 yards if they didn't get a little bit more yardage. But they converted, ran out the clock, won the game. This decision was a 16.4% increase in win probability for Baltimore and has still stayed in the top 5 for the last, 7 weeks now.
That was the one where you see John Harbaugh literally ask Lamar Jackson, Lamar, do you want to go for it? And he said, hell yeah. And so they went for it. But I just love the fact that John Harbaugh obviously asks his QB how he feels about it. Of course, Lamar Jackson wasn't going to say no in that moment. But in those decisions, 4 of those teams ended up winning. Miami, of course, did not. But there's so much to talk about trusting your defense. I love when coaches actually trust their offense and know that, hey, if they don't convert in a situation like this, they can fall back on their defense to get it done as well. So really cool there.
That's not the first time we've seen Harbaugh and Lamar, that interaction. I think it was a couple of years ago against Seattle. Lamar came off side and I was like, let's go for it. Go for it. He's like, let's do it. And they converted that one and I think won that game as well.
I think they take that with a grain of salt, though, because Lamar's always going to say to go for it. So maybe trust the analytic guys on the sideline. So let's switch gears and move to worst decisions. Some of the names on this list are a bit surprising.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with you there. And it's a great spot to reiterate that one bad decision doesn't necessarily doom you to the doldrums of the bottom of the EdjSports coach rankings. Like, especially this top coach. It's I really thought he was going to be our front runner for Coach of the Year. It's kind of tailed off a bit, though. Okay,
so it's Kevin Stefanski with the worst decision so far, week 5 against the Chargers.
Yeah, this one was a shootout. This was late in the 4th quarter. Browns are up 1 point, 42-41, a little over 2 minutes left. They still have all 3 of their timeouts. The Chargers have 2 left. It's a 4th and 6 at their own 18. So this one definitely requires a little bit more explanation than some of these other decisions. Yeah. This was an 18.1% error, so it decreased the Browns' win probability by 18.1% by choosing to punt instead of go for it.
Okay.
So the worst case scenario in this situation, Cleveland fails. The Chargers get the ball in field goal range. Teams are typically conservative in that situation. LA, knowing they're only down 1, they're already in field goal range. All they need to do is run down the clock, kick a field goal to win the game. Cleveland still has 3 timeouts plus the 2-minute warning remaining. So if the Chargers score a touchdown, they likely have time remaining for a game-winning drive. It's probably going to be pretty quick because they're going to use their timeouts. Chargers will likely get a pretty quick strike there since they're already inside the 20, and that's what ended up happening with the punts. The Cleveland punts it away. The Chargers go down and score with like a minute and a half left, minute 12 left. So it was a quick strike. Best case scenario, Cleveland succeeds. They're able to run out the clock or run a lot of clock off to leave little time for the Chargers if they do end up having to punt again, or maybe they get another 4th down situation.
Yeah.
But the harder, it is a little bit more of a difficult decision to wrap your brains around. But even with tighter constraints, so what we do on these decisions is, so this situation, we have customizations for Cleveland and the Chargers.
Okay.
At this point, we know Cleveland is a really good offense. I think they were top 10 in the season at that point. The Chargers were, I think, a top 10 defense as well. Even if we look at it and say, all right, Cleveland is the very worst team in the league on offense and defense, like they used to be, and the Chargers are the very best team on offense and defense, the model still says they should go for it. Yeah. So that's what we call a high confidence error, meaning looking at every situation, even turning the tables against them heavily, we still think they should go for it. It still strongly favors to go. So this was a big error by Kevin Stefanski, obviously number 1 on the season.
Do timeouts remaining change the analytics at all? You keep bringing it up, so
yes.
I'm curious as to how that skews it.
So in this situation, if they have no timeouts, and the Chargers, they fail, the Chargers get the ball, they can pretty much run the clock all the way down for a last-second field goal. If they fail, it would still most likely be a go in that situation. Okay. Partly because they don't have the ability to stop the clock as much on defense, so it's kind of a last-gasp effort. But timeouts are factored in and do weigh pretty heavily on the decision, especially as we get late into the game. A lot of times we have fans ask us, on Twitter when we're posting, like, hey, how much did this timeout affect, wasting this timeout affect them? It's like, early in the game, not so much, but it can come back to bite you late in the game, absolutely.
All right, well, congratulations, Kevin Stefanski, for making the worst decision thus far. Number 2 on the list will be Robert Sala, Week 4 against Tennessee.
Yeah, this one was in overtime. So the Jets ended up winning this game. So sometimes people say, hey, they won the game, so it doesn't matter. Well, not necessarily true. So in this situation, it was 4:34 in overtime. I think this was the opening drive in overtime. The Jets got the ball. They're tied at 24 still. They each have 1 timeout left. They've each used one of their 2 overtime timeouts. They get all the way down to 4th and goal at the 4. And this was the play right before this. They actually had 3rd and goal at the 1. And Zach Wilson rolled out to the right. There was no way for him to get the end zone. Instead of throwing the ball away, he just runs out at the 4-yard line. So a huge rookie mistake there, first off. I think Sala said he would have gone for it on 4th and goal. Even at 4th and goal at the 1, even on 4th and goal at the 4, it was a 13.1% error not to go for it. Okay. So he would have been at the top of our list if it would have been a 4th and goal at the 1 and he went for it. But he comes down to number 2 worst error of the season. And, this is one in overtime. You got a chance to win the game. You're 4 yards from the end zone. Easier said than done. But even if you don't score, Tennessee is all the way backed up. Yeah. There's 4.5 minutes left. They've got to drive all the way down the field. They're going to run out the clock, at that point. But you've kind of put them in a bit of a predicament, being so far backed up. They've got to get nearly 55 yards just to attempt a 60-yard field goal, which is no gimme. Especially, Randy Bullock has been a pretty good kicker, but it's definitely not a gimme there, a high probability field goal. So going for it was definitely the best chance to go ahead and just win the game right there.
Yeah, without a doubt. Coming in at number 3 is Arthur Smith from Atlanta, Week 4, same week, but this time against Washington.
Yep. So first-year head coach Arthur Smith taking over, coming from Tennessee. Mm-hmm. This was right at the 2-minute warning. They're up 30-28. They still have all 3 timeouts. Washington has 2 timeouts left. Another 4th and 4. This time they're at their own 31. So this is similar to the game that we had, the decision we had in Cleveland. Washington ended up winning on a touchdown with 33 seconds left. So the decision to punt was a 13% error for Atlanta. Basically, you go for it, you get it, you can pretty much run the clock out. So Washington still has a couple of timeouts, but you've got a chance to move down the field and even pick up another first down. If you punt, you put them, they only need a field goal to win. You basically have no chance. You're leaving it up to your defense, and that defense is not very good at all. At this point in the season, too, Washington was a very good offensive unit. So, again, just very similar to Cleveland. You want to put the ball in your team's hands to close out the game. You want to have the best chance to keep the other team from scoring is to have the ball, essentially.
Well, the 4th worst decision here, actually, I thought was a bit surprising given the offense that Mike McCarthy has. This happened in Week 6 against New England.
Yeah. Really surprising. McCarthy's been pretty good for most of the season. He did have our biggest error this past week. It was a smaller, only 5.6%. This one was a 12.8% error, a 4th and 2 at the New England 33. Dallas is trailing 21-20. This one ended up being a crazy finish. So not only did he make the wrong decision by our model to kick the field goal, he missed the field goal. Trayvon Diggs ended up getting a pick six, bailing him out to put the Cowboys up. But then Mac Jones responds with a 75-yard touchdown pass to put the Patriots back up. Dallas obviously ended up winning this game in overtime, but we see this mistake a lot. Dallas made a similar mistake in week 1 against Tampa Bay, where you kick the field goal to take kind of a temporary lead, a temporary win, but there's still a ton of time left for that other team to make a game-winning drive. In this situation, they would have gone up 2 points. A field goal still beats you at that point. You're actually underdogs to win at that point a lot of times because there's so little time left. The other team has the ball, only needing a field goal. Sure. So this, it's just, if Dallas fails to convert, they still have 3 timeouts plus a 2-minute warning remaining. They've got a really good defense this season. They can make a stand even if they give up a field goal there. They were down 21-20, so they're down 4. They can't tie it with or win it with a field goal anymore, but a touchdown would still win it for them. And like you said, with that offense, I would bet on Dallas to get a score there late. Yeah,
Daxon, for sure. What's the threshold in terms of percent error that you're comfortable with, where you look at it and you're like, we'll accept that?
That's a really good question. So we look at them kind of, they're all errors, and like I said, because even if you get 1 or 2% errors, because of the way we have our customization set, we believe those are still errors. Sometimes you flip them and it's not. Okay. But what kind of the best way to answer that, I think, would be is a lot of our clients, NFL teams that use our product and our data, look at it about 3%. So they'll say, hey, if most coaches have a guy in the booth with a headset on, and he says, hey, coach, if it on first down, like if we get to 4th and 4 or less, it's a 3%, go at least. Yeah. So a lot of them will say, hey, if it's not 3%, I don't really want to know about it, because it is, it can be a lot. Every little bit counts, but there are some times where you look at it and it's like, it's 1.5 points, but there are sometimes some things that coaches see on the game that, in a given game, the model obviously can't account for how the teams are playing on that specific day. A team could be having a really bad game, and we know this offense is really good, and as a fan, you sit there, like the Bills this past weekend, you're like, you're just waiting for they're going to go down, they're going to score, they're going to end up winning this game. The coaches know that kind of stuff, and they take that into account. So it's typically, long way around to the answer. Probably about 3% are ones that we're pretty comfortable with.
Fair enough. Okay. 5th worst decision, Mike Zimmer for Minnesota. This was early on in the season against Arizona.
Yeah, Mike Zimmer has had kind of a rough couple seasons when it comes to 4th downs. One of those old school coaches, been around a long time. He actually did have one really good decision last year. They failed to convert. Seahawk Russell Wilson went down and beat him. But this year, he made the mistake to punt 4th and 6 at their own 29-yard line. Again, another one that's going to be, we're going to have some dissent on this and some pushback. But it was a 12.4% error. There was only 2:52 left in the game. They're down 1. So they force an Arizona punt after punting. They're able to drive down for a game-winning field goal attempt, but miss, which seems to happen with Minnesota a lot. All their games are close. It comes down to field goals. They miss them quite often. But again, this is similar to the Atlanta and Cleveland situations, except they're trailing this time. Okay. If they fail, they still have their 3 timeouts. They've got the 2-minute warning. Giving up a field goal allows Minnesota to win with a touchdown still. If they give up a touchdown, it still allows them to tie with a touchdown and PAT. Assuming Arizona doesn't go for 2, they probably play it safe. I don't know. Arizona's Cliff Kingsbury's pretty good, but likely kind of take that 8-point lead and say, hey, we dare you to score a touchdown, 2-point conversion to tie us, take it to overtime. But Arizona can still get a couple first downs and just run out the clock after a punt. Especially with that offense. Minnesota's defense has been better this year, but that offense, it's not far-fetched to think they're going to get 2 first downs and just completely run out the clock after Minnesota wastes their timeouts. So by punting, you just don't even give your offense a chance to retain possession. And that offense just, it's not really a high probability that you're going to convert a 4th and 6. It's probably around 40-45%. But, you got to give your offense that chance.
Yeah, especially at that point of the game. As you said, there's so much that goes into these decisions, and they're preparing all week. Hey, if we get into a situation, 4th down and this, what are we going to do? They're talking about that all week leading up into these games. So it's not like they're just flying by the seat of their pants making these decisions. So I do want that to be noted for the men that were up in our top 5 for worst decisions. But let's make our way into some of the coach rankings, starting with the top teams in EPI.
Yeah, so really no surprise on this part. As I mentioned, our EPI just basically looks at teams and how well or how poorly they've performed to this point in the season. Sure. It's pretty easy to tell by looking at which teams are the best and the worst. It might be a little tougher to determine the order that they are at the top and the bottom. But number 1 is Los Angeles Rams. They've had a couple of losses. The loss to the Titans this week was pretty surprising. The Cardinals, the Cardinals are a very good team, and they show up in our top 5 as well. But they're top overall. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, defending Super Bowl champs, Tom Brady. They're always going to be up there at number 2. We've got Buffalo Bills coming off a tough loss where they failed to even score a touchdown this past weekend, but they've still been top 3 here in overall EPI.
Did that loss move them? Were they at 2 by chance?
So it dropped them in our power rankings, for sure. They dropped 2 spots. They were at number 2, I believe, and they dropped down to number 4. Okay. This is the first time we've run the EPI for this season. That's included in the coach rankings. Okay. But I imagine, Tampa Bay was on a bye, so I imagine Buffalo was up there probably at number 2. Okay. But they're still up there. They've been really good throughout the whole season. Arizona, I mentioned, comes in at number 4 with just 1 loss, but had a pretty big win against San Francisco this past weekend, even with backup quarterback. And then you mentioned Dallas Cowboys, that powerful offense, a very good defense this year, comes in at number 5 overall in the EPI rankings.
Okay, hit me with the bottom 5 EPI.
Yeah, bottom 5, probably no surprise. Detroit Lions still have not won a game. They've had some close calls. Yeah. But they're coming in, number 32. Just have not been. They've been better than people think, in some of those games, but still, overall coming in at number 32. Jacksonville Jaguars coming in at number 31. Even with a big win there this past weekend, their other games just have not been very good for them. The New York Jets, Robert Sala, and first-year head coach there, as well as first-year head coach Arthur Smith in Atlanta comes in. They're right there at 30 and 29. And then another first-year head coach, David Culley, and the Texans, who have got problems both on the field and off the field. Management, front office, everything down there is kind of rough right now, but
pretty expected, I think, for the bottom 5 EPI, right? Okay. So let's hit the more unpredictable portion of the rankings, at least from a fan standpoint. So we have the CCI rankings, and as you mentioned at the top of the show, this is rankings based on coaches on how well they maximize their win probability on 4th downs and looking at their net gain or loss over the course of the season.
Right. And it's important to note that we do exclude obvious go-for-it situations. So if there's a situation where, a team's down 5, there's 45 seconds left, they've got 4th down, they have to go for it. If they're down 3 scores early in the 4th quarter, you have to go for it. So we do take those out because we don't want to credit coaches for those decisions that are extremely obvious. Yeah, or gimmies. So coming in the top 5 in CCI, number 5 is Matt Lafleur of Green Bay, who we saw had the number 2 overall decision of the season so far, was our 2020 EdjSports Coach of the Year last year. So he's kind of picked up where he's left off from last season. Number 4 could be a surprise here.
It is a surprise.
First-year head coach Urban Meyer in Jacksonville has been pretty good. Even in that game against Miami where Brian Flores had our top best decision, Urban Meyer had a couple good decisions there. This past week he had our, I believe, 2nd or 3rd best decision by going for it against the Bills. Had a 4th and 1 at the Buffalo 11. They were tied. Instead of choosing just to take a field goal as an underdog, he stayed aggressive, had one early in the game too. So he's actually been pretty good overall.
In games.
At least I was going to say in games when it comes to 4th downs. Outside of games, some questionable things going on. But yeah, when he's between the lines, or I guess he's technically just outside the lines, he does what he needs to do to keep him in the game, at least for a little while.
I'm surprised by that.
They're not in many games. Next is John Harbaugh. Probably no surprise here. 2019 EdjSports Coach of the Year. Especially in this past week, they were down, only down 7 coming out they were in the 3rd quarter, and choosing to go for it from his own 29-yard line, 27-yard line, I believe. Fairly early in the game, I think a situation where you see a lot of coaches choose to punt and say, hey, a lot of time left, we're only down 7, let's just let our defense handle it. But like you said, with Lamar, you got to keep him out there. So he had a handful of good decisions along with that 5th best decision of the season that we talked about earlier. Number 2, again, not really a surprise, Frank Reich. Widely thought of as one of the most analytically savvy, coming from Philadelphia in their Super Bowl season, where they had were well known for their 4th down goes that season. Up here, number 2 in 4th down decision making, and then number 1. Not really a surprise, I don't think, especially after this past weekend. But Brandon Staley, he's they're in Los Angeles with 2 of the top 6 decisions of the season, and coming in number 1 overall, or not number 1 overall, number 1 in the 4th down decision-making portion of our coach rankings.
He seems like high risk, high reward. So he's fun to watch in terms of when those decisions come up. But when you look at the bottom 5 in CCI, there seems to be a theme among these men. Why don't you take that?
Yeah, they're all pretty old school coaches, except for the number 28, who comes in at 5th worst. These guys, it seems like they just refuse to adapt to the new age of fourth downs. The last few years, they've been consistently low. I don't think
Bill Belichick?
Right?
What?
I don't think any fans of these teams will really be upset with this because I see them screaming on Twitter during the games when I'm kind of running our numbers that they're not happy. So, yeah, number 32, Bill Belichick, who kind of I don't know if started the whole analytical trend thing is right, but with that 4th and 2 years ago against the Colts in his own territory, just got roasted for that. But our co-founders Frank and Chuck actually had an article in the New York Times about that on why it was the right decision, and there were that was the beginning of early of analytics and football,
Sure.
I think, and people like us were pumped when we saw that, but. He adapted there for a while, and then over the last few years has just kind of backed off a lot. Yeah, reverted. Say Mike Tomlin, he has a couple of decisions every year that are really good. Mm-hmm. More often than not, he's kind of on the wrong end of these decisions, making errors. Over there in Pittsburgh, number 30, Pete Carroll. So we love to roast Pete Carroll because he doesn't show up as the worst this year, but over the last few years, he is consistently like 26th, 27th, 28th, 30th this year in the CCI, looking at fourth downs. It's like he just refuses to go for it. One of those guys that'll punt, like we said in our promo video, he'll punt from the 40-yard line instead of giving, Russell Wilson, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league, hasn't had him. He'll be back this week, but instead of giving him a chance to get 1, 2, 3, even 4 yards around that midfield area, just refuses to go for it for whatever reason. So hopefully, Pete, if you're seeing this, you could be so much better if you go for it. You got one of the best quarterbacks. Number 29, a guy we mentioned in the era is Mike Zimmer, who has his moments, but had a game this year where cumulatively his errors added up to almost, I think, 30%, so like a third of a loss over the course of that game.
Yikes.
And then 28 is Joe Judge, who I mentioned, is the one that's not really an older coach, comes from the Patriots organization though, so maybe that has something to do with it. But over the last couple of years has just not been good. He's kind of the king of the 4th and short. Let's go up there and try and draw them off sides. Let's pretend and then call a delay a game or let a delay a game get called and punt anyway. So, yeah, Joe Judge rounding out the bottom 5 in
So
the
Joe
CCI.
Judge, Mike Zimmer at 29, Pete Carroll at 30, Mike Tomlin at 31, and then Bill Belichick at 32.
Dead last.
Interesting. All right, well, it's the moment we've all been waiting for, right? The overall EdjSports head coach rankings, and I think we need to start at the bottom to really drive some suspense for our viewers, okay? Drive some suspense for me. So let's start at the very bottom 5 coaches as we see it.
Can't give away the goods too soon, so we'll start with the bottom. We've got number 32. So bottom half of the league here, they're pretty much all bottom half in CCI or fourth down decision making. Okay. Most of them are bottom 8 in the EPI. So really not a surprise. As I mentioned, we give equal weight to those two metrics. So either one of those can kind of pull you down a little bit more, but these are consistently bottom across the board.
Okay.
Robert Sala, first-year head coach. They're 30th in EPI, 26th in CCI. So a little bit better on fourth downs, but still not doing too great. He hasn't. This is a thing that we've noticed in the past too, and years ago we kind of adjusted how we looked at some of these things where you've got your teams that aren't very good. They're not really in many games. Mm-hmm. If they are at the beginning, their win probability is already so low, they don't really have as much to gamble with.
Okay.
So you're not going to see some really big errors or really big good fourth down go decisions, except for the game, like we said, against Tennessee where they were in overtime. And so that was a big decision.
So a decision like that doesn't really move the percentage a great deal because they're already...
Yeah, so they're looking at decisions where they're throwing fourth down. It's like you go for it, you have 5%.
But what does it matter?
Field goal, it's 3%. Okay. So those can add up over time. But yeah, the one opportunity he had, he failed versus Tennessee in overtime. So we'll see if he can kind of improve. He said first year defensive coach, but he's a young guy, so we'll see if we can see him get a little bit better. And then Joe Judge, I mentioned second-year head coach here, 24th in EPI, 28th in CCI. So he's one that's actually done worse on fourth downs than his team has performed as far as looking at those rankings. He does get some surprising wins. They just went over the Raiders. They had a big win over the Saints earlier this year. They beat the Seahawks last year, and they moved down in our coach rankings at that point late in the year. And we caught a lot of flack for that, but despite his fourth down decision-making, they still find ways to win in some of these games. But just hasn't been very good. He's had some recent comments against analytics, saying, if Bill Gates was a head coach, Excel could win you games. Bill Gates would be a lot better football coach, something like that. Just kind of some comments that make you scratch your head a little bit. Could utilize analytics more. Maybe they'd have more than what the 3 wins they have right now. I don't know. Sorry, but
shots fired. So rightfully so.
No truly great decisions for him this year. He had a fairly obvious one on 4th and goal from the 1 at Carolina. Like I said, 9 times out of 10 now, I think coaches go for it there. So can't really give him too much credit there. But yeah, see if we can get him to improve coming up if he makes it past this season. I think he'll still be there. It's only been 2 years, and they've had a lot of injuries, so that has definitely kind of impacted his tenure there so far. And then number 30, so third to last, David Culley, first-year head coach down in Houston. He's 28th in EPI, 23rd in CCI, so actually been a little bit better than his ranking as far as the team performance. But one thing that's not calculated in the coach rankings that we kind of covered earlier this year was their Week 2 game against Cleveland. They were around midfield. They had a 3rd down. They got down to 4th and 1, I believe. There was a penalty on the defense. Instead of declining the penalty to get another chance at first down, or instead of declining the penalty to go for it on 4th and 1, actually, I'm all confused. He declined the penalty to make it 4th and 1 and chose to punt. So instead of going for it, and instead of accepting it to get him another chance on 3rd down, he says, we'll take the 4th down, but we're going to punt. So that's not calculated in our coach rankings, but if it was, he'd probably even be lower.
Okay, so we've got Robert Sala at 32, Joe Judge at 31, and then David Culley at 30, which I think those names are expected, just going through the different formats that we have today. Is there any notable names near the bottom, of those bottom 5 that stand out or that are a bit surprising? Yeah,
so just outside the bottom 3, so they just avoided it. Arthur Smith, isn't a huge surprise here at 29, his first-year head coach. They're 29th in EPI, a little bit better in CCI. Doesn't have a ton of huge errors aside from the one we covered in the top 5. But number 28, Mike Tomlin. So we mentioned him 31st in CCI. Steelers haven't been great this year. They've dealt with a couple injuries. Big Ben just doesn't look like he really has it anymore, at least not the way he used to. But yeah, CCI pulls him down a little bit further than EPI. I mentioned only 18th. But if he could get better at his 4th downs, they might rise up this list a little bit throughout the season.
Yeah, I find Mike Tomlin, because when you think of his coaching style, you think, great coach, consistent. I wouldn't have expected him to be this low on the list. But that's why I leave the analytics to him, and I don't do this.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the bottom 3 are young coaches. They're typically conservative. We actually saw Zach Taylor in his first year a couple years ago I think he finished last in our coach rankings. Part of that was because Cincinnati was so bad, but he was just so conservative. And this year, he's actually been a lot better. He's around middle of the pack in both CCI and EPI in our rankings. That puts him, I think, right around 17th overall. But he has definitely improved over the last couple years. So hopefully we can see some of these guys follow that same little trajectory.
All right, take us to the top of the list, will you?
Yeah, so just missing outside the top 5, or out into the top 5 is Frank Reich, just missing the top 3. Not really a surprise here. Colts, I mentioned, he's very analytically savvy, known as a pretty good coach. 14th in EPI, 2nd in CCI. Sean Payton coming at number 4, similar coach, is a very good coach overall. Usually pretty aggressive on 4th down, sitting at 6th in EPI, 9th in CCI. So both of these guys top 10 in CCI. Frank Reich is the one in the top 5 who has the lowest EPI. The Colts haven't really performed up to par. Had the big win over the Jets this past year. I think they've got a great defense, so I think he's one that can move up this list because he's going to stay up there in CCI, and if they can improve their performance on the field, he could move up. As well. So neither of these coaches between those two really has any huge errors. They kind of just make medium gains throughout the game. You see them, they'll have a handful of 4%, 3%, 5% that kind of keep them up in it, and they don't make the big errors, which we love to see. So typically see them near the top of our coach rankings.
Consistency.
Yeah. Coming in at number 3, Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona. So he's higher in EPI than CCI, still top 10 in CCI, but the Cardinals I mentioned are 4th in EPI. He's 10th in CCI, so it pulls him up. He was really good last year in CCI, except for 2 errors. They had 2 errors last year that were over 19%, that were late game situations, choosing to kick a field goal in, I believe, a tie game, or when trailing to tie the game with a little bit of time left. But this year he only has 1 error over 3%. A lot of times, they don't really get in those situations where he's going to make an error. It's a very 4th and short, and with that offense, they got some big plays where they just move the ball really well, and he knows how to put his team in the best position to win this year. So coming in at number 3. Number 2, you mentioned Mike McCarthy.
We were dogging him earlier for the 4th worst decision thus far. I think it was week 6 against New England, but he's at number 2 on the list. So
he was really high last year in CCI too. So a lot of people were upset. We had him kind of up there in our coach rankings because the fourth down decision making is an important factor in our rankings. Dallas really struggled last year. They had the injury to Dak that kind of brought them down. And some people said any list with Mike McCarthy in the top 10 is just insane. But this year, it's warranted. They're 5th in EPI. He's 7th in CCI. Aside from that error this past week and the error that we covered earlier, he's been very good. He had 3 times where he went for it this week on 4th and 1 or 4th and 2. They failed on all 3. It's not his fault. He made the right decision and still put them in the best chance to win at that point. Just weren't able to execute and get the first down. But he's making the right calls more often than not this season.
All right, through 9 weeks of play, who sits at the top of the list?
Brandon Staley, first-year head coach in Los Angeles for the Chargers. So,
I think that's impressive, first-year head coach.
It is, yes. And especially what really impresses me with him is he's a defensive guy. Was the Rams defensive coordinator last year. A lot of times you see those guys with that defensive mindset want to trust their defense and not really put the ball in their offense's hand, or not necessarily not put the ball in their offense's hands, but play it safe and say, I trust my defense. So for him, as a defensive guy, as a first-year head coach, we typically see them kind of be more conservative in their first year. He's at the top. So they're 9th in EPI. He's number 1 in CCI and number 1 overall. So 2 huge goes. I mentioned he's got the one that was, I think, 3rd best of the season so far and 6th best. So both came last week, but really doing a good job. Only 1 error over 2.5% as well. So not only
consistent.
Yeah, very consistent.
And aggressive, to say the least. So congratulations to Brandon Staley thus far for being at the top of our coach rankings through 9 weeks, with 9 weeks still to go. And, the Chargers have had their struggles, but they've also been, I think, consistent for the most part. So I think that he's going to stay at the top of this. It'll be interesting to see as we move throughout the remaining portion of the season if he moves down, if anybody like Mike McCarthy can top him. But I think that it's safe to say they're in good hands.
Yeah, and one last thing to note is you mentioned guys moving up and down. It's not uncommon to see some changes from week to week. So there are some coaches that'll face tougher tests. You'll have a coach that's in a very close game. It comes down to the wire. There are more opportunities to make errors or to make good decisions, whereas some teams are on a bye, or other teams may, be in a blowout where they're either getting blown out or they're blowing the other team out, like Mike McCarthy.
Yeah.
The blowout this past week, he had some good decisions early while they were still in it. But, it'll be interesting to see how these coaches do move up and down. You'll have your Frank Reichs, your Sean Paytons that may move up because they're so consistent in CCI. If their teams, play well, they'll move up. Cliff Kingsbury, but at the same time, don't be surprised to see someone kind of jump up into the top 5 that's not there today. So we really kind of see the cream rise to the top as we near the end of the season and get to week 17.
And we'll be here each week to walk you through the movement of said rankings. So this was our debut of the 2021 EdjSports Head Coach Rankings. You can view the full list at edjsports.com. That's EDJSports.com, as well as each coach's best and worst decision of the season so far. Ian and I will be here with you every Wednesday to talk about that movement. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you.